fact, most of us probably can't explain why we consume what we consume. And yet, business seems to know better than we do in many cases. The choices we make about food are not often opaque, are not often transparent. We need to know why we do what we do with food.
It's, to me, just one of the many social institutions, our economy, for example, that have not only shown up their own decayed state in this crisis, but have shown how old habits of thought and old habits of being are no longer necessarily suited to the environment that is fast evolving and emerging around, underneath, and through us.
So we know colonial influence is still something wholly obvious in the city, and something Cape Town can be famous for. It shows itself in our food and social environments within hospitality industries, as well as in the publication houses and organizations, different restaurants and cafes, and of course, the many, many large-scale farms that still exist all over the region.
Decolonizing food is about those three things. We allow food sovereignty in the home, choice, and we also, attach value to it.
I see food as oftentimes people's only discretionary income. And so when times are hard, the one area that people cut back on is their food expenditure.
The assumption is that the customer or the customers are unqualified to exercise their freedom of choice amongst competing alternatives wisely.
And so this relationship between food and the consumer and the food environment is complex, it's dynamic, and it's shaped by a number of external factors. And I think the final thing is that food has demonstrated how deeply unequal our food system is.
New rituals have had to be invented, and new ways of doing things have had to be invented. And this has been part of human history throughout our long experience of crisis. Many of the rituals that we observe today emerged out of those kinds of crises, whether they were crises of food scarcity, crises of insecurity, or crises of migration because of political instability.
If food safety is a priority, as we are told, ask yourself the following question: how safe is glyphosate? And how ethical is it for our local supermarket to trade on GMO foods without the appropriate labeling? GMOs, big machinery, fossil fuel, derived fertilizers make conventional agriculture undesirable and unaffordable.
Apartheid started way before the actual apartheid happened. So with coloniality, just creating kind of borders upon borders within the area that cut people off more than anything from their food systems. I struggle with really grasping the idea of decolonization, because for me, just the word speaks to kind of an uncolonizing. So, does it mean we go back to before, the way things were before, which is kind of impossible right now?
And so we've got to think about how these existing planning codes kind of reinforce these colonial mentalities of what the food system should be, and slowly or rapidly deconstruct those systems.
The reason I speak in these general terms at the beginning is that I think it's important for us to understand that South Africa and South African experiences of food scarcity and of the consequences of food exchanges, or the consequences for food exchanges during a time of crisis, this is not unique. It's not unique in the contemporary moment, and if we compare it with other societies, but it's also not unique in the historical perspective.
But these social network influencings truly speak to that validity that food can offer in this notion of contemporary trends. So this idea of how things are trending and what kind of the connection that has to the capitalistic notion of success. So in influencer culture, food, when done with humility, can be forgiving in its nature, right? So it's something tangible to connect with. especially in these exceptionally trying times.
Food is a way of exchanging meaning with complete strangers, because let's not forget that part of the sacred sharing of food in religious and even non-religious rituals have been to, in a sense, create equality between not just people who know one another, but between people and strangers. Because if we're all eating the same food, we can't possibly be in enmity or in rival situations, because food is also potentially poison, and therefore people are sharing food because it creates an equality of risk and an equality of exposure, but at the same time an equality of exchange of emotions and value.
Many people fail to understand the importance of eating healthy, the importance of having an eco-friendly space, the importance of growing your own food, the importance of self-reliance. I could go on and talk about all these important elements that gardening can teach someone, But it was never something, it was taken for granted.
And how is it that these multiple systems have come together in a way that stifles a political response to food issues? And I think it is about this kind of complex intersection of culture, of economics, of politics that play out in food.
I personally think regional human-scale regenerative organic agriculture is both an opportunity and the future of food.
We have to take note of this, the rampant mistreatment and racism of restaurant staff, which is also synonymous with restaurants around the city. And when we see solidarity in these kind of protests, we have to be critical in whether or not this moment is an opportunity for a much deeper change.
What we've seen in the most divided society on the planet is that in a time of crisis, people with have often reached across barriers to people without. There has been a community effort, because I think for everybody, food is central, not just to survival, but to the actual exchange of social meaning.
We have abandoned the indigenous knowledge when it comes to medicines that we can find from the soil. We often rely on Western medication, but COVID-19 is also giving us that mindset that we have to think back on how people used to sustain themselves when the Western medication was no longer working.
If we think about the way in which your access to food, your food choices have been personalized and have been then become this object of blame. If you look at national government documents and sort of a lot of the global discourse on these diet-related non-communicable diseases, they're still being called diseases of lifestyle, which then puts it on the person and not on the system. And so there's this kind of medicalized language that's making it feel as if it's your fault if you can't feed your family. All along the way, the delivery of the right to food is getting put onto the individual rather than onto the system.
What the last 120 days have demonstrated to many of us is a reminder of our vulnerability to environment, that we're actually not these supreme beings who live on the planet or in control of the planetary system.
So if we're thinking about promoting urban agriculture as this transformative moment, then we need to be doing more than claiming bits of land back and thinking about, well, why are marginalized people on marginalized lands? Why is it that access to inputs is limited? Why is that oftentimes, particularly the state, and to an extent, various of the NGO sector, kind of use growing your own as this kind of, oh, look over there kind of tactic?
And I think in the last 100 years of human history, the impact of a particular system of economics, the capitalist system, has shifted the agricultural system radically to go from being the kind of mercantilist system of the last 600 and 700 years into the radically highly industrialized systems that Jane describes, that Mpumelelo refers to, and that Zayan was talking about in terms of interrupting older patterns of food exchange and food rituals.
If you look around the world today, and you look at how young people in many other countries, are moving us forward as far as regenerative organic agriculture is concerned, you'll see that it's small, affordable equipment, things that people can basically do in their own neighborhood. But yet, here in South Africa, our mindset is not there yet.